Greetings, friend, and welcome to the Between the Covers podcast, where we are working every day to remove the self-limiting beliefs that are preventing us from becoming the heroes of our own stories. I am Marcus Spar, and today I finally feel like I am in a place where I can start to share about my story. Not just little bits and pieces that I sprinkle throughout these 60 odd episodes at this point. And this is probably going to be broken up into multiple episodes. I don't know how many, because there's a lot to share here. I will do my best to not leave you with cliffhangers as we are going through these stories. Yet I wanted to just share my life, my experiences, and what has brought me to where I am today. Before we dive in, I do just want to remind you that if you have any questions that you'd like to have discussed on this podcast, or if you have suggestions for individuals that we can look into for hero studies, then take a look in the description where you can find a link to my podcast page, and you can submit any questions or individuals that we can discuss for future hero studies. I was born in the 80s. I think it kind of depends on where you're getting your information on generations, but I have typically fallen into the millennial generation, or I guess Gen Y as well. I am in the older spectrum of millennials, and I have spent most of my life actually where I am right now in southeastern Washington state. It is a very conservative area of Washington, and I often joke around with people that when they think of Washington and it's known as the Evergreen State, that's only like a third of the state, and the remaining 2/3 on the eastern side of the Cascade Mountains tends to be more rolling hills and tumbleweeds than evergreens. And there is also a big divide that takes place with the Cascade Mountains, that on the west side of the mountains, it tends to be very liberal, and then the east side tends to be much more conservative. This is actually something very common that you see in more developed cities and regions compared to more rural areas. And there are a lot of places in eastern Washington that would qualify significantly more as rural compared to metropolitan. I grew up with my two brothers, my twin brother, who is 4.5 minutes older than me, and our eldest brother, who's 2.5 years older than we are. And we grew up with my mom and my dad. And how I've always told this story, I don't know how true this is. I want to say I've shared this with family in the past, and they're like, that's not actually how it worked. What I recall is we moved a couple of times before the age of 1. And then we ended up in the house that I remember growing up in for most of my life. I only have stories because there's a lot of these that I don't remember. But there is the story of my twin brother and I both having colic, and we were lying on the floor, and our eldest brother was between us, plugging his ears while we were crying because of the pain from colic, and he's just saying, "Babies, stop crying, babies." And during this time, there was a very prominent medicine that would be given to babies who had colic. And it turns out that my twin brother and I, we were very lucky because this medicine is one that was pretty easy to overdose on. And my mom, being the very intelligent individual that she is, was smart enough to set a timer to remind her when it was time to give the next dose of this medicine. Because what would typically happen is you would have parents that would start hearing their babies cry as the medicine was wearing off, and they're like, oh, it must be time to give them the next dose, so they would give them another dose. And it was supposed to last like 4 hours, I think, 4 to 6 hours, but like that last hour was when it started to wear off. And there were young babies who ended up passing away because their parents were giving them the medication too soon. And that was actually something that was very fortunate for me and my twin brother, is our mom was like, I need to make sure that I set a timer so that I give it to them when it is time to give them the next one and not a moment sooner. And another story that is for those of you who have not experienced being around twins, especially, I don't know if this is very common with fraternal twins, but it's definitely something that I hear with identical twins, and this was absolutely my story. My parents had a saying that what one of us couldn't do, we both could. My partner Libby and I were having dinner with my dad and my stepmom, and we just got to talking about this story. And this story is the epitome of what it was like trying to raise me and my twin brother. My dad stepped away, I want to say it was only for like 5 minutes or something like that. And he comes down the hall, and when he turns the corner into the kitchen, he sees my twin brother on top of the fridge and me on the floor. And I'm sorry for those of you who are only listening to the audio of this. I will try and describe it as best as I can here, but we're both giving him the like mouth agape, eyes wide open, like, huh? We weren't doing anything kind of look. And my dad still doesn't know how it happened, but the only way that he can think that this happened is we pulled out the drawers to make steps that went up to the countertop. And my twin brother climbed up to the counter, and once he got up there, I grabbed the door to the freezer, opened it so that he could grab onto it, and then I closed the door and he pulled himself up, and he was just sitting on top of the refrigerator. And the way that my dad describes it is he just looks at us and he's like, what are you doing up there? And we're just like, I just wanted to see what was in the cupboard. Well, he didn't say that. I don't know how verbal we were at that. But my dad's like, did you want to see what was in the cupboard? And we're like, uh-huh. And so my dad picks both of us up, or he gets my twin brother down, opens the cabinets that were up there, picks us both up, and shows us. It's like, is that as exciting as you thought it was going to be? And it's just like, that was what we did. Somehow, we could figure some of this stuff out that Oh man, I feel sorry for my parents. They had to be such hawkeyes around us because we would get into that kind of stuff. Now, this is also something that is not a part of my memory. This only comes from stories. My twin brother and I, we were actually held back from kindergarten. So, among our peers, we were actually a year older than most of them. And that was because we had to do speech therapy for, it was 6 months, I think it was, before we could go into kindergarten. And the reason for this is because we did not speak English. My twin brother and I, we spoke our own language. My parents called it an angelic language, but we spoke and communicated mostly through grunts and groans. And somehow my eldest brother, he couldn't speak the language, but he understood it, and sometimes he would translate for our parents. And as I share this story, one of the things that often comes up is people saying that they wish that we had some kind of dictionary or something like that of this angelic language, because we only can remember one word. And oh, the story of this one word. My poor grandfather, my dad's dad, he was watching over us. And there's this one day, I think my dad had come home for lunch or something like that. But it was my grandfather. We called him Paka. He comes to my dad as he's opening up the door, and he's like, "Son, I'm so glad you're home. I, your boys are trying to tell me something. I just don't know what it is." And apparently, we were like in the laundry room or something. I kind of remember being told that we were outside, but as my dad was describing this story, it was we were in the laundry room and we're pointing at something. We're just pointing. And we're like, "Paka, Paka, Bayous." And my Paka was like, "Oh, you mean the broom over there?" "No, Paka, Bayous." And he's just pointing at all these different things, and we're just getting frustrated because he doesn't know what Bayous is. And he's getting frustrated because he can't figure out what Bayous is. And so he's like, "What is a Bayous?" And my dad is like, "Oh, Bayous is a spider." "Spider? How do you get spider from Bayous?" That is the only word that we can remember from this supposed angelic language that my twin brother and I spoke. So we were delayed in starting kindergarten because we had to learn how to speak English. And the speech therapist that we met with at our school said that we knew it. We just needed to have the push and the right motivation to get us to actually speak English. It was They were saying that it was going to take like a year for us to be ready for kindergarten, and my mom experienced a lot of shame around this. And then it was after 6 months, it's like, nope, they know what they're talking, they know English, they're ready for kindergarten. So we were delayed in starting school. And that's something that I vaguely recall. I vaguely recall going to our elementary school and going into this one special room, and there was this lady that met with my twin brother and I. And I remember playing games like Chutes and Ladders and Candyland and all that kind of stuff, and I didn't really know what was going on. But that was me in speech therapy. And one of the things, this is something that I don't remember if I've told this to any of my family or not. Maybe I have. I know I've told my partner Libby. My first conscious memory growing up is waking up, and I think it was in the morning. I might have been down for a nap or something like that. But my twin brother and I, we slept in a bunk bed for years. And I remember getting up from the bottom bunk of the bunk bed and being very unsure of where I was. And I remember going out of the bedroom and I'm looking around. We lived in a split level home, and so the way that it worked is you entered in the front door and you were immediately on a landing, and right there at the front door was stairs going down and stairs going up. My room was in the basement, and so I remember poking my head out and I'm looking around and nothing looked familiar. And I remember walking up the stairs and I get on the landing and my mom is in the kitchen that you can see from the landing. And I remember standing on the landing and looking up and not recognizing my mom. She was a complete stranger to me in that moment. And she started talking to me, and I remember just being terribly confused. And as I would share this story, it would make me laugh, because it's like I could have been deposited as an alien or a changeling for all I knew. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know who these people were. I don't know if that's something that's very common, but that's something that happened to me. So I grew up, and I've shared this before. I grew up with some very not the most affirming experiences. I grew up being known as the crybaby. I was an overly emotional child. And I remember experiences where I ruined the fun that my brothers and I were having because I started crying, and that brought attention to what we were doing, and suddenly we had to stop because apparently Marcus hurt himself, so you guys need to stop whatever you're doing. In fact, there was this one time that we were visiting my uncle and my aunt, who my uncle was a pastor, and they had these wooden stairs that went down into their basement. And for some reason, my brothers and I thought that it would be fun to get into a cardboard box and slide down the stairs in order to make it from the top to the bottom. And my eldest brother at one point shared that he remembers sliding down and the box lifted up and it missed the last couple of steps, and he landed and kind of went like a kind of noise. And then like the time after that, I go sliding down and I hit the bottom, and the box doesn't stop and it just continues to slide, and I crash into something and I start crying. And both of my brothers, they come down and they're like, Marcus, it's okay. Stop crying. It's okay. And I wasn't able to be consoled. And all of a sudden you hear my dad, boys, whatever you're doing down there, knock it off. And I remember my brothers were pissed at me because I just ruined their fun because I got hurt and I started crying. It was actually something that happens quite a bit throughout my life, is I would get hurt and I would start crying. I remember one time we were in Yellowstone and we were at this little play area, and there was this toy that was just this gigantic pole, and it had ropes that had handles on them, and you could just like run around and swing around and everything. And eventually I I lose my momentum and I come swinging back towards the middle, and I just smack my knee into one of the rocks that they had in the center. And I remember letting go of the handle, and I'm just kind of walking. I'm going, ow, 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 like that. And then as soon as I look down and I see blood all on my knee, I just start screaming bloody murder. Yeah, I was a crybaby growing up. That I have shared previously that this is something that I did not recognize until just the last couple of years, was empathy. I am naturally an empath, and I feel emotions strongly, whether they're my own or they're someone else's. And I actually found out this is something I inherited from my mom. She's an empath as well. And it's unfortunate that this was something that wasn't fostered while I was growing up. No, I was told to buck up. I was told to man up. I was told to stop crying. Boys don't cry. Men don't cry. Girls cry. If you're crying, then you're being a girl. Oh, come over here and I'll give you something to cry about. I received a lot of those messages growing up. And that was the start of me losing my voice. And we'll have to pick up from there next time. I would like to talk more right now, but I do need to jump on a client call. But I started to lose my voice. I started to not trust it. I started to not trust myself. And we'll pick up next time. And hope that you're enjoying this look into the craziness that has been my life so far. And until next time, live strong for today.